an actor that makes westerns visits a ranch in Montana that changes his life. A story about an actor who realizes the true meaning of his life. In the opening scene, we get to see the protagonist Avery Ford. He is a charming silver fox. On set, he finds it difficult to focus on the script due to not sleeping well. His assistant isn't helping much as she's being rather annoying, and Avery doesn't seem to like that. They finally wrap up the commercial shoot when one of the workers comes up to Avery and asks for an autograph. Shortly after, his manager approaches him and congratulates him on the finished shoot. However, Avery doesn't think that selling canned beans is good for his career. Because it is associated with Aim to Please, his Western movie, she claims that it is a good way of making some money as he's been struggling lately. He's unsure whether he can continue working, but she reminds him that he had signed a contract. Handing him a hazelnut latte, she assures him that everything's fine. Inviting him to dinner, she hopes that he says yes, but he tells her that it's not a good idea. Returning home, he is met with his neighbor in front of the elevator, who's holding a small dog. Seeing the dog, he contemplates whether he should get in with her or not, so he lets her before him and gets into the other one. Enjoying some sushi, he watches a cooking show before going to bed. It cuts to the ranch, where we see Casey watching Aim to Please on the old TV. Casey is an old cowboy, so watching the movie about cowboys brings him a lot of joy. Soon after, his daughter comes with hot chocolate in her hands and asks him whether it's the same movie he already watched. He claims to love rewatching old stuff, so she jokes about him loving the coffee she's giving him from the previous night. Heather is a young, attractive woman with a charming smile. She is very eager on keeping the ranch and giving up on it. Sitting down, she opens the discussion about it. They're supposed to open the ranch in 2 weeks but find it difficult as there aren't many visitors. Even the group that was supposed to come canceled on them. Heather is hopeful about them having business all year round. But Casey takes it with a more realistic approach and even suggests closing the ranch to be a good idea. She doesn't agree with his opinion and suggests that they should do a promotional event with someone famous to bring attention to the ranch. An idea pops into her mind and she suggests they invite cowboys to the ranch, but Casey says that every cowboy he knows is either away or 6 feet underground. Right as he says that, a scene of Avery in Aim to Please comes up where he's dressed as a cowboy, so Heather suggests they call him. Avery spends his day off relaxing at home. However, his way of relaxing is working out, getting a facial, getting a massage, and taking care of himself. Waking up in the morning, he heads to the kitchen to make some coffee while asking Siri about the weather. Opening the fridge, he hears his doorbell, so he lets in whoever it is at the door by clicking the remote he has. Candace, his assistant, comes in and lets him know that an intriguing offer has come in. Telling him about the luxurious dude ranch that he has to stay at only for the weekend, she expects him to agree, but he declines her offer. Getting closer to him, she reminds him that there isn't anything hard he has to do. She suggests he hangs out with his fans, takes pictures, explores the ranch, and even eats a steak, but Aubrey reminds her that he has been a vegetarian for a long time. Candace reveals that the studio is excited about the appearance, that they're even doing a press release. Confused, Avery says that he hasn't agreed to do the appearance, but she reveals that she had agreed in his name. Before leaving, she asks him to buy some jeans as he'll have to cosplay a cowboy while being there. Avery leaves for Montana and we can see him at the airport as he arrives. A young man waits for him there with a sign that says Ford on it. Approaching the young man, Avery hands him all of his stuff before going into the souvenir shop to buy a cowboy suit. Arriving at the ranch, Avery is shocked to see how old the place looks as he was promised a 5-star resort. He asks the young man whether that is all of it, and the young man says it is. Getting out of the car, he grabs his suitcase and heads to the house. Arriving there, he is met with Heather, who asks him about his traveling experience. He thanks her for being a fan of his movies, and even though she hasn't even watched any of the movies and it's her father that is a big fan of his, she lies about loving all of them. Curious, he asks why the ranch doesn't have a lot, but she tells him that it has everything it needs. Avery gets scared for a second when a pig named Curly tries to bite his leg. She makes the pig go away as he stands there protecting his legs with his suitcase. They leave his stuff outside and head to see Casey. Assuming that he misses the open spaces, she asks him how it is like to be a cowboy in New York. He mentions Central Park and how he visits it frequently. While walking, Heather notices him limping and asks why he's doing so. He lies about it being an injury from a riding accident. Seeing through his lies, she asks him whether it's because of his new tight boots and jeans, as she rips the price tag off his jeans. Getting inside the house, Heather reveals that her great-grandfather had opened the ranch, which was a working ranch at first and later became a dude ranch. Avery is impressed by how the inside looks and compliments it, but he is curious as to why there aren't many people. Heather tells him that they aren't opening for another 2 weeks, but that there will be people for his appearance the following day. She suggests they go with her father to see the horses, but he declines and lies about having too many phone calls to take. In reality, he is afraid of horses or any other animals of any sort. With that, she decides to take him to his ranch, and he isn't very impressed by it as it is not only old but has no Wi-Fi. Despite not liking his room, he settles in and gets ready for dinner. He is surprised that they have dinner at 5:30 p.m., but respects their ways. Arriving at the front porch for dinner, he is greeted by Casey, who admits to loving his work. Avery says that it's a pleasure to be with them as they sit down to feast. Before digging in, they drink a shot of strong liquor that Avery has a hard time swallowing. Casey dumps a blood red steak on Avery's plate and he does his best to pretend as if he enjoys it. He tries chewing the piece of meat when Casey asks him about his private life. Avery reveals that he likes to keep it private and admits to not having a wife or kids. Casey reveals that his daughter Heather is single as well, but she asks him not to talk about that topic. Curly seems to be after Avery, as she attacks him once again. Luckily for him, Casey takes her away while Heather goes inside to grab some lemonade. He takes the chance of being left alone to wrap the steak in a napkin and hide it in the pocket of his blazer. When they come back, he pretends to have eaten the steak as he cleans his mouth. Not knowing about tomorrow's schedule, he asks Heather to text him about it, but she decides to just tell him as any normal person would. Breakfast is at 7 a.m. After that, he will have to mingle with the guests, talk, and send some autographs. Casey chimes in and reminds them about the barbecue that will take place and how they have to eat the meat they cook. He grinds another steak and asks Avery whether he wants more, but he politely declines. He starts fake yawning and soon excuses himself while thanking them for the dinner. Going back to his room, he tries to get a signal but realizes that there isn't any. However, he doesn't give up and even finds it at the top of the chicken coop. While desperately begging his assistant to get him out of the ranch, Curly comes out of nowhere and startles him. He accidentally pouches the ladder and gets trapped there. However, that's not the worst part. The worst part is when Heather comes and he can tell that she has heard his conversation with Candace. Putting the ladder back up, she holds it while he's going down when his tablet falls splashing into some water. He rushes to grab it, but it's too late. Trying to wipe it off, he accidentally grabs the steak from his pocket, and Heather can see what's going on. Could you be less of a cowboy? She asks and Avery decides to be honest with her. He reminds her that he is an actor and his job is to pretend, just like she pretended to watch his movies. She claims to say that only to sound polite and they start fighting. Upset, he asks her why he was lied to about the ranch being a 5-star resort when they don't even have Wi-Fi. Heather claims that everything he needs is there and that he doesn't need the virtual world. Concerned, she reminds him that people are coming in the following day to see him, but he assures her that he can keep the charade going on. The next morning, he is woken up by Heather knocking on his door. He has slept over breakfast, so she puts down a pile of food on the table. Hearing cricket noises, she asks him why he has a cricket in his room, so he shows her the little sleep aid device beside his bed. The guests will be arriving in 20 minutes, so Heather suggests he irons his jeans and gets to the ranch before they do. A group of people stands in front of the house as Avery walks up to Heather and her friend. He wonders why there aren't many people there as he was promised half of the population there. Heather tells him that that is half of the population and asks him to behave. Heather's friend Jen chimes in and excitedly shakes Avery's hand while claiming to be a huge fan of his. Avery is finally called to speak in front of everybody and he starts by thanking everybody for coming. A reporter named Will introduces himself and asks Avery when the next Aim to Please will be coming out. Avery claims that it will be very soon before receiving another question. The boy that picked him up at the airport asks him why it has been 3 years since the last one came out, and Avery claims that he is still willing to please and suggests they all wait for the greater thing to come. Heather comes to him and hands him the script of his movie while reminding the crowd that Avery will be reading his best scenes. However, since it is the first time he's found that out, he admits to having forgotten his reading glasses. A lady from the crowd chimes in and hands him her rather girly reading glasses. While everyone's enjoying the reading, Heather notices a very specific car pull into the ranch. Out of the truck comes a tall man who is not very welcomed by Heather. Her attitude and the fact that there are a lot of people there make him leave, but he promises to come back. Later in the evening, everyone's enjoying their dinner, and Avery gets asked by Will whether he can take some more shots of him. Avery agrees, thinking that it would be some normal shots, but all of them suggest he rides a horse. Despite trying to change everyone's mind, he is left with no other choice but to get on the horse. Heather brings the horse and concern can be noticed on her face as well. Avery puts one of his legs on the horse and stops himself before he has to climb onto it. Confused, she asks him what he's doing and he admits that's the furthest he can go as usually a stuntman does the job for him. Not wanting him to embarrass himself or their ranch, she pushes him up until he's finally on the horse. Scared, Avery holds onto the horse as everybody's taking a picture. Unfortunately, Avery ends up falling off the horse and hitting his head. Heather takes him to a doctor who runs a couple of tests and lets him know that the horse he fell from is named Buttercup. The doctor says that he only has a mild concussion, so Avery thinks that he can take the next flight out of there, but the doctor tells him that he's not allowed to fly for the next week. However, he promises to check up on him in a few days when he comes to check on one of the horses. Realizing that he had been a talented vet, Avery asks Heather why he wasn't taken to a real doctor, but she tells him that the only two there were not available. Going back to their truck, Avery sees a bar next to it and decides to have a drink to calm down. They get in and he immediately notices that people are taking pictures of him. Jen comes over to them and shows the pictures that are trending all over social media of Avery. He gets a call from Candace at the same time and she tells him that his pictures are doing him good. She even tells him that the studio wants to start shooting more movies but he has to come back the following day. Unfortunately for Avery, he is stuck at the ranch and he tells her that there's nothing he can do to come back earlier. Later on at night, Avery finds it hard to fall asleep, and so does Heather, but she puts on one of his movies to see what the fuss is about. Immediately, she finds herself enjoying the movie and finding it quite interesting. Waking up early for breakfast, Avery heads to the ranch where Curly waits for him on the porch. Not wanting to be attacked again, he runs off and enters a random door on the side of the house. He apologizes for bursting in once he realizes that he is in Heather's room, but can't seem to take his eyes off her in a towel. Casey reads the newspaper in excitement as Avery falling off the horse is everywhere. Therefore, their ranch is mentioned as well. Heather disagrees that being associated with the case would do any good for the ranch, as she's saying that the phone rings and it is Dr. Frank. Avery gets inside as well and Casey asks him about his head. He claims to have been better but admits that his head is getting better as time passes. Looking at the newspaper, he shakes his head and apologizes to Casey for even trying to be a cowboy. Casey admits to knowing that he was a city slack but never said anything because he assumed he knew how to ride a horse. Despite Avery admitting to having stunt actors, Casey asks him to sign a picture of himself as he claims to still be a fan of his. As Avery's looking at the horse blanket sitting on the sewing machine, in comes Heather. She lets him know that the doctor had called her and he is safe to drive. He admits that he doesn't know how to drive and Heather is confused as to how he gets around. Luckily for him, New York has great public transportation. Sitting down, Heather hands him a book of his father's most successful game. He pretends like he knows everything about it but later reveals that he had Googled it. Curious, she asks him why he started doing a Western movie and he admits to thinking that he looks good and that because he has a big forehead the hat looks great on him. However, the main reason is that he had always wanted to be an actor. It was his way of escaping the orphanage that he was in. Heather apologizes and says that she can't imagine life without a family, but Avery claims the complete opposite. He reveals that he started working when he was 19 in a deli in New York. One day a customer who was a producer had come in and claimed to like how Avery looked and gave him a part in a Western movie. The rest is history is what he says. Surprisingly, Heather pulls out the CDs of Aim to Please and admits to liking the movie. Aubrey tells her that it's not the movie she likes but rather him. Looking out of the window, Heather's face drops as she sees the guy that wants to buy the ranch come over once again. She excuses herself and leaves the room. Asking the guy to stop wasting his time, she reveals that the answer is no. He asks her to calm down and suggests he pays double what he paid for J Ranch. Heather gets saddened as she realizes that the ranch he grew up at will now be turned into something meaningless. The guy lets her know that the offer is to their benefit as he reminds her that he can buy it from the bank when it forecloses it. It isn't about money for her or her father, it is their home they're talking about. As she's demanding him to leave, Avery comes out and hears the guy being rude to her. He tells the guy that she had been clear about her decision and asks him to leave. Heather and Avery go to a farmhouse to get a new hat and boots for him. While trying the boots on, he asks her whether the guy that wants to buy the house is the reason for his coming and she reveals that they haven't had business in a long time. However, she admits that the fact that place, where she grew up, is more important to her than anything else, and she doesn't want to give it up to some developers. Unfortunately, the ranch has time only by the end of the season to get their business back on track, otherwise they'll have to close it. Jen interrupts their conversation and makes a snarky comment about them spending time together. Out of the corner comes her mother as well, the lady that gave her glasses to Avery so he can read the script. Jokingly, she asks him whether he needs to borrow her glasses. Jen lets him know that he can buy another pair with no pairs on it. As he's walking to the aisles, the girls can't help but admire him from behind. After he's gone, Jen turns to Heather and offers her some money to help with her citation. Heather thanks her but claims that the money won't be enough. After having fun in the town, Heather and Avery head their way back to the truck. His favorite snacks are hazelnuts and we can see that as he snacks on them while they're walking. Heather admits to him being right about modernizing the inside of the house a little bit, but he claims that the authenticity of the old ranch will be gone. She asks him when the new movie's coming and for the first time, he admits that the studio had dropped him. Trying to comfort him, she asks when he has the time for his personal life, but he doesn't answer and changes the topic. Returning to the ranch, Avery sees Casey working and decides to help him. He offers his help despite not knowing how to do many of the things. They work on fixing one of the broken doors of the barn when Casey asks him how long he's been single. Avery admits to being single for a while as he prefers spending time alone by himself. As they're taking the horses back to their spots, Casey reveals that he used to think the same as him until he married his wife. They were together for 40 years before she passed away. Once she passed away, Heather moved back home to take care of him, and that is what he's concerned about. He's afraid of her staying with him and not meeting anyone else. As they're taking care of the cows, Casey asks Avery what he thinks of his daughter. Avery calls her smart, quick, and not hard to look at. He admits that she is a catch for someone else. Putting the horses' vests back on the shelf, Casey admits to wanting to buy a flat-screen TV but asks Avery not to say anything to Heather about it. After finishing their tasks, they head to the horses where they see Heather with Buttercup. They walk over and Heather tells Avery that Buttercup has come to apologize. Heather lets him know about some hack while holding a horse, and Avery is confused as to why he would need riding instructions when he's never going to ride a horse again. However, Heather lets him know that he will try once again with Buttercup and encourages him to go on her own. Once he's finally on her, he gives her a little pull and she starts walking. Soon after, Heather lets go of them and Avery is left alone on the horse. After some time, Avery seems to get the gist of it as he and Heather ride their horses all over. After finishing their rides, they get off and walk around. Avery admits that the place is special as it's unique in its own desolate way. Seeing a river in front of them, Avery grabs a rock from the ground and shows her a cool trick with it. They start shoving their scars on each other, and when they get to Avery's bite mark on his hand, he explains the story of it. Heather assumes that is the reason he's afraid of animals, but he claims that he's not afraid of them, rather annoyed, and doesn't want to be around them. Growing up alone, Avery learned to take care of himself, so he doesn't see the need to have any pets around. Calling him lonely, Heather thinks that she'll get away with it, but Avery asks her about her date. She admits to being divorced because her former husband didn't want the same things as her. He had been a Wall Streeter, so Avery understands why she might have hated him. Returning to the horses, Heather gets on her quickly and challenges Avery to a race back. Sitting on the front porch while rain pours, Avery sees the doctor approaching him. After some tests, the doctor reveals that he is free to travel. However, Avery doesn't want to leave and asks the doctor whether he cannot tell anyone that he's fine. The doctor promises not to tell anyone but asks Avery not to break Heather's heart. Going out to the front porch, Heather gets a call and it's people reserving rooms on the ranch. On the other side, she hears horse noses and it's no other than Avery riding Buttercup. Getting closer, he notices the pie sitting on the table and asks whether they can have some. As they're eating the delicious pie, Heather thanks him for coming over and raising their bookings by a lot. After finishing the delicious pie, they head to the town to deliver the horse blankets Heather made. As Avery goes inside the store to put them where they belong, Jane and Heather talk outside. Jane is sure that something is going on between the two, and even though Heather doesn't agree, she admits that he has turned out to be a different guy than she thought. After finishing at the farm market, they head back to the car where Avery hears loud music. Following the sound, they end up at a chili contest. Unfortunately, they get brought up on stage and Avery is the celebrity judge. Despite not eating chili, he tries to dish it and gets surprised by how good it is. The chili bowls get better and better as he tries the different recipes. Before choosing the winner, he thanks everyone for giving him a second chance and for the honorable judge position. Announcing the winner, he gets attacked by a huge hug from the woman who had won. Coincidentally, it is the same woman that gave him her glasses when he first came to the ranch. As days pass, Avery learns more and more about how to be a cowboy. From doing random chores and everyday activities to riding horses, Avery becomes almost unrecognizable to the man he was when he first came. Chilling in the chicken house, he calls his manager Candace and asks her whether he can have some more time off. Of course, she doesn't let him, but he doesn't care and does the way he wants to. Candace reminds him that they have a meeting the following day in the evening, but all he says is that there's nothing he can do. Later in the evening, they sit in the living room watching a movie on the new TV. Heather lets them know that she'll be checking the horses and Avery tries to go with her, but it's stopped by her father wanting to have the talk with him. He warns Avery that there's so much that he needs to learn and advises him not to say anything to her that has no meaning. Before he lets him go, he asks him to simply be a cowboy. Joining Heather and the horses, he admits that he hasn't had the talk since he was in high school. He starts telling the story about how he never learned how to drive when Heather gets an idea. She asks him to meet her behind the barn as she wants to show him something. Being dirty-minded, he expects her to wait for him behind the bar, but when he goes there he sees her on a tractor. She wants to teach him how to drive and he gets the gist of it pretty quickly. Driving around the ranch, they enjoy the quiet and the greenery in front of them. Later in the evening, Heather stays watching Avery's movies, and she can't stop blushing over seeing him on the screen. Avery spends his night in his room talking to Curly about his feelings towards Heather and how he wants to tell her everything. As he's talking, he hears Curly squealing and realizes that she's giving birth. In the morning, we see Curly surrounded by her babies when Heather walks in. She looks at them in awe and Avery lets her know that each and every one of them has a name. She suggests they take a box to put them in and transfer them to the barn, but he asks her to leave them as he wants to share the room with them. Later on, the doctor pays a visit and checks on the newborn baby pigs. He approaches Heather and claims that she's never looked happier. She asks him not to think anything of her and Avery as he'll be leaving soon. The doctor lets her know that if he wanted to leave he would have left already, and she gets confused by it. Despite it being confidential, he lets her know that he has stayed for longer because he had fallen in love with her. The news makes Heather excited to see him, so she goes to the chicken house. Finding him there, she climbs the ladder until she's sitting next to him. Looking around, he admits that he has realized why she's going to miss the place. The life that it gives Avery makes it difficult for him to leave. However, he promises to be back in the winter, but she tells him that they might not be there in the winter. Taking the chance, he claims that he should do what he's about to do in time. Right as he's about to kiss her, a car pulls up in front of them. Coming out of the car, they see that it's Candace, and Avery doesn't seem to like that. Walking to her, he asks her what she's doing there and she claims to have gotten there to get him back to work, as it seems like he has forgotten where his home is. He introduces Candace to Heather and calls her his manager, which is what she is. Candace asks him to end the excursion he's having and focus on his career. She is weirded out by him pretending to be a cowboy and advises him to put all of his energy into the role she has for him. Fortunately, she has managed to score 3 roles for him. The 3 new installments of Aim to Please. He thanks her for what she's done for him but doesn't look as excited as one might be. She tries to convince him to come to the hotel room with her, but Casey chimes in and invites her to stay over the night. Later on, they sit at the table having dinner when Candace complains about them having lunch too late. Avery lets her know that it's dinner that she's eating. They usually get up at dawn and go to bed early. Trying to ease the conversation, Jane asks Candace how long she and Avery have been working together. She proudly admits that they've been working for 7 years and even claims to be his longest relationship. As they're eating pie, the young journalist comes over and tells Avery that he's ready. Candace asks what they're talking about and they tell her that he is giving an interview for a school magazine. Avery begins his speech by addressing his fans. He admits to working for years, wanting to be something he didn't even know about. He admits that just a week ago, he didn't even know what a cowboy is. In the evening, Heather brings some pillows to Candace and the tension can be noticed. Candace tries to provoke her by claiming that she can deal with anything, but Heather answers her in the same tone. Getting up, Candace asks her whether she can give her any advice. She takes her silence as a yes and she advises her not to get attached to him as he's a big movie star on the road who has no time for relationships. Heather doesn't agree and claims that he has changed, but Candace reminds her that he's an actor after all. The next morning, Candace tries to go over the schedule but Avery doesn't pay any attention. Putting the book down, he admits that he feels amazing being there, but she reminds him that similar things have happened to him. He needs someone for the trip and once the trip is over, he acts like he doesn't know them. Unfortunately, Heather hears all of that and tries to run off. He runs after her and reminds her that it was her talking and not him. He admits that some of it is true but not all of it. He tries to explain to her that he feels different about her than the other times he had feelings for someone, but she doesn't want to hear it. In the evening, Casey goes to Heather and asks her for a chat. He understands that she's scared, but she mustn't allow her failed marriage to stop her from dating or spending her whole life sitting with him. He tries to change her mind but nothing seems to be working as she's sure that he is going back home with Candace. Tossing and turning, Avery has a hard time falling asleep when a noise catches his attention. Looking out the window, he sees the man that wants to buy the ranch sneaking around the barn. Opening the gates, he lets all of the horses out and Avery tries to stop him. Unfortunately, all the horses run off, but Avery can punch the guy enough to make his hat fall off, so they have that for evidence. Waking up the next morning, Heather and Casey are saddened to see that their horses are gone when Avery comes out of the corner, riding Buttercup while every other horse follows. Casey and Heather lock the gates and the horses are finally back on safe. Seeing the white hat on the ground, Casey promises to do something about it as he's had enough of being quiet. Avery gets off the horse and stands with Heather, who keeps apologizing for involving him in such situations. Looking her into her eyes, he admits that it's good having something to fight for. Their moment gets interrupted by Candace pulling into the driveway. Avery goes to his room to pack where he says goodbye to his piglets. Getting out of the room, he is greeted by Casey and Heather. He thanks them for everything they've taught him. Casey leaves and Avery takes the chance to talk to her alone. He admits not wanting it to end on bad terms, but Heather says that some stories have good and some bad endings. Respecting her choice, he leaves and gets into his car after saying I am to please. Their lives move on and some time passes before they see each other again. Same as in the beginning, we see Avery on set trying to perfect his lines. Something keeps going wrong and he keeps messing up, making him more and more upset. He eventually snaps and starts yelling about how he can't be working as an actor anymore, but Candace manages to convince him to continue by reminding him that his career started in the same movie. The season is over for the ranch as well, and despite having visitors, Casey and Heather weren't able to get enough money for the debt. Right as they're about to get inside, the guy who wanted to buy the ranch pulls up in their driveway. Fortunately, he is there to make amends and Casey shakes his hand in agreement. Avery's career seems to be more successful than ever. Not only does he do his stunts, but he does scenes with animals. In the old days, he would have used a stunt double to climb on the horse, but now we see him climbing with no problem and riding freely. After shooting the new installments of the movie, Avery goes to Candace and lets her know that he won't be doing any more westerns, as he wants to focus on something more important in life. We see him at the ranch, and Casey and Heather greet him. But Heather has no idea what happened. She is shocked to find out that Avery bought the ranch and that they won't lose it. He admits that they are from 2 different worlds, but all he asks of her is to let him love her. How long do you plan on staying? Let's see where this trail goes is what they say to each other before sharing a passionate kiss. The ranch girl has finally found her perfect cowboy.